We live in a world that often values visibility over substance. We're constantly encouraged to put ourselves out there, to share every win, every milestone, every ounce of progress with the world. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with celebration, the danger is in beginning to believe that being seen is the same as becoming something. It's not. Real growth, sustainable, soul-deep growth, doesn't usually happen in the spotlight. It happens in the unseen spaces, in the quiet, in the dark. It happens when no one's clapping, when no one's asking for updates, when the only voice pushing you forward is your own. When you build yourself quietly, you're choosing something that our culture doesn't always understand: internal validation over external applause. You're choosing to let your actions, not your announcements, speak for you. And that's not just a discipline, that's a mindset shift. It's a refusal to outsource your worth to the public eye. Psychologically, we're wired to crave affirmation. It feels good to be acknowledged. It's comforting when others validate our direction. But that craving can become a trap if we allow it to replace internal conviction. You can get so caught up in telling people what you're going to do that you never actually do it. You spend more energy managing perceptions than building the reality. And that's not growth. That's performance. Building yourself quietly protects you from that trap. It gives you the space to get it wrong without judgment, to wrestle with the process without performing for an audience. And here's the truth: the process is messy. Transformation is not cute. Healing, leveling up, realigning your life, it gets ugly before it gets beautiful. And when you're doing that in front of people, it can become performative instead of authentic. You start to shape your growth around how it looks rather than how it feels. And that kind of growth doesn't last. There's also a kind of sacredness to private progress. Philosophers have long talked about the idea of the inner citadel, that deep, protected part of the self where your values live, where your strength comes from. When you build quietly, you're reinforcing that inner citadel. You're not asking the world to co-sign your journey. You're saying, I know who I am, I know what I'm becoming, and I don't need applause to stay the course. That kind of confidence doesn't shout. It doesn't beg to be seen. It just is. Now, I'm not saying don't share your journey. I'm saying don't depend on sharing it to legitimize it. Because the work you do in private is where your character is forged. And if the character isn't there, the accomplishments won't hold. What good is building a life that looks good online but feels hollow in your own hands? What good is having people admire you for a version of yourself you haven't actually become? When you allow your actions to speak louder than your announcements, you're investing in authenticity. You're saying, I'd rather be it than just say it. And that difference between the person who's talking about it and the person who's doing it is everything. Let's be honest, building quietly requires restraint. It requires maturity. It's easier to tell people what you're working on than it is to keep your head down and do the work. But that quiet work, that's where the magic is. That's where the foundation is laid. And when the time is right, when the moment arrives, you won't have to convince anyone of who you are. Your presence will confirm what your words never needed to prove. So if you're in that quiet season, if you're building something that no one sees yet, take heart, keep going. The silence isn't punishment, it's protection, it's preparation. And when your actions finally speak, they'll speak with a volume no announcement could ever match. Build so solidly in the dark that when the light finds you, there's nothing left to prove. There's a certain kind of strength that doesn't show up in the spotlight. It doesn't dress itself up for public approval or ask permission to be great. It lives in the quiet choices. How you speak to yourself in the morning, how you handle disappointment, how you keep showing up even when no one's watching. That kind of strength is called discipline. And if building yourself quietly is the path, then discipline is the fuel that carries you along it. Not performance, not hype, not aesthetics. Just the daily decision to be committed to what you said you wanted, long after the mood you said it in is gone. And that's where a lot of people get stuck, because we've been conditioned to focus on display, on showing the world how together we are, how much progress we're making, how close we are to the life we claim we want. But the truth is, display is seductive and discipline is sacrificial. One feeds the ego, the other reshapes the character. And if you're serious about building a life that lasts, if you're serious about becoming someone who doesn't just dream of growth but lives it, then discipline has to matter more than display. The problem is, discipline doesn't always come with applause. Nobody cheers for you when you decide to wake up early to pray, to journal, to study, to work on your craft. There's no viral moment for choosing not to react emotionally, for saying no when it would have been easier to say yes. These are invisible wins, but they are the wins that build you. Psychologically, we crave visible rewards because they affirm that we're doing something right. But psychologically, we also grow the most when we delay that reward, when we train ourselves to do what's right, not what's instantly gratifying. That's what separates people who change temporarily from people who transform permanently. Temporary change relies on momentum and motivation, but transformation, that's forged in discipline. That's doing the work when your emotions are flat, when no one's texting you back, when nothing on the outside is giving you a reason to keep going, but you keep going anyway. That's a different kind of power. And let me tell you, people may not notice that kind of growth at first, but they'll feel it when you walk in the room. Because discipline builds substance. It builds emotional intelligence. It teaches you patience. It refines your integrity. And all those invisible attributes eventually create a visible shift in your presence. You can't fake the weight of someone who's been through the fire and stayed faithful. That kind of person doesn't have to shout. They don't have to perform. Their life speaks without trying. Now let's talk real for a minute. Discipline is not about being perfect. It's not about waking up at 5 a.m. every day and checking off a rigid list of rules. It's about alignment. It's about making consistent choices that reflect who you want to become, not who you've been settling for. And you don't need to broadcast those choices to make them real. In fact, the most powerful transformations happen when you're still under construction, still raw, still figuring it out, but still showing up. Quietly, daily, faithfully. Philosophers like Aristotle talked about virtue as something you cultivate through repetition. You become brave by doing brave things. You become disciplined by making disciplined decisions. It's not about waiting until you feel strong. It's about becoming strong through your practice. And over time, that practice becomes your posture. You start to carry yourself differently. Not because you've arrived, but because you've been becoming. There is a confidence that comes from discipline that no stage, no applause, no amount of external validation can give you. Because you know you've done the work. You know what it cost. And that knowledge, that quiet, steady awareness becomes your anchor. So if you're building right now and nobody sees the progress, if you're saying no to the noise so you can say yes to your sud, if you're choosing discipline over display, keep going. That's the work that counts. That's the work that lasts. That's the work that builds someone who can carry the weight of what they're praying for. Don't just be seen, be solid. There's a reason the most profound breakthroughs often come in silence, in solitude, in the stillness where nobody else is watching and nothing else is competing for your attention. That's space. The quiet, the protected, the hidden isn't just a gap between the person you are and the person you're becoming. It's the container where transformation takes place. And that's why silence matters. Because silence doesn't just protect your process, it protects your vision. When you're building something meaningful, whether it's a purpose, a calling, a new identity, or a healed version of yourself, you have to understand how fragile that vision is in its early stages. Just like a seed needs the soil, not the spotlight, your vision needs the dark. It needs covering, it needs care. Exposing it too soon can invite interference, confusion, or worse, doubt. And not always from malicious people. Sometimes it's from well-meaning voices who simply don't see what you see. And if you're not secure yet, if your foundation is still forming, those voices can shake something loose in you that hasn't even had time to take root. We underestimate how much influence the noise around us has on the clarity within us. Every opinion, every comment, every critique, spoken or implied, can become a weight on your vision. If you're not careful, you start reshaping your path, not according to purpose, but according to people. You shift your direction not because it's wrong, but because someone else couldn't see the destination. And now your future is being filtered through their limitations. That's why silence is more than a discipline. It's a shield. It's a boundary that says, not everything needs to be explained right now. Not everyone gets access to this version of me. You don't owe the world a play-by-play of your growth. Sometimes the best thing you can do is go quiet, step back, recenter, because clarity thrives in stillness. Psychologically, we know the brain processes information differently in quiet reflection than in constant stimulation. Neuroscience shows that in silence, the brain actually goes into a sort of restoration mode. That's when deep thinking, creativity, and emotional processing occur. So when you're building yourself quietly, you're not just hiding for the sake of mystery. You're engaging in mental and spiritual restoration. You're aligning with who you really are. Outside of performance, outside of pressure, outside of people pleasing. And I want to make this plain: silence is not avoidance. It's not weakness. It's wisdom. It's choosing to protect your energy, your momentum, and your focus. It's resisting the urge to prove yourself mid-process. Because every time you explain something before it's ready, you risk draining the very energy you need to complete it. There's something sacred about honoring what's still in process. Think about it. Even nature knows this. The caterpillar doesn't emerge halfway through the cocoon and say, "Look at my wings in progress." No, it waits, it develops. It lets the pressure do what only pressure can do. And when it's time, it doesn't need to announce itself. The wings speak for themselves. And isn't that what we're all after? A kind of growth that speaks when you walk into the room. A kind of peace that doesn't need to be posted. A kind of identity that's built so deeply in God, in purpose, in quiet resolve that it doesn't crumble at the sound of opposition. So I want to challenge you, can you sit in the silence long enough to let your vision become whole? Can you resist the urge to share before you're secure? Because what's forming in you needs protection, not promotion. It needs space to become unshakable. And when it's ready, it will rise. And it won't need explanation. Let the silence sharpen your vision so when you speak from clarity, not confusion. There's a reason why some of the most extraordinary things grow where no one can see them. Roots, for example, they don't stretch wide in the open air. They dig deep underground, hidden, invisible to the eye, but essential to the life above. You don't see them growing, but their strength determines the stability of everything you do see. And that's exactly what it looks like when you're building yourself in private. It's not glamorous. It doesn't always feel productive. But make no mistake, what's growing in the shadows is what gives you the power to stand when the light finally finds you. It's easy to underestimate that season, the hidden season, the quiet, uncelebrated grind of becoming. You look around and see everyone posting their wins, announcing their breakthroughs, putting their highlight reels on display. And there you are, somewhere in the middle of your process, working on yourself, making intentional decisions, dealing with your triggers, choosing healing over hiding, discipline over distraction. And you wonder, is any of this even working? But I need you to hear this. That's where the real growth happens. It's not on the stage. It's not in the celebration. It's in the shadows where you face your own patterns, confront your own fears, and stop performing long enough to get honest with yourself. That kind of growth isn't immediate. It doesn't show up in Instagram captions. It shows up later in how you respond to pressure, in how you lead when no one's affirming you, in how you carry peace even when everything around you is chaotic. That kind of growth is slow, deep, and foundational. Psychologically speaking, when we commit to quiet growth, we engage with something called intrinsic motivation. That inner drive that pushes us not because we'll be rewarded, but because we're committed to becoming whole. When you grow in private, you strip away the noise and return to the truth of why you're doing the work. And that clarity strengthens you from the inside out. You become rooted, not just in vision, but in identity. And I get it. There's pressure to emerge quickly, to prove that you're healed or ready or successful. But if you force a premature reveal, you'll miss the opportunity to become someone who can sustain what you're asking for. Visibility before maturity is a trap. The platform can come before the person is prepared. And when that happens, what looks like a breakthrough can actually become a burden. That's why we have to stop rushing the process. Stop being so eager to be seen that you neglect what needs to grow in the unseen. Because when you give yourself permission to grow in the shadows, you begin to value process over performance. And that shift changes everything. You're no longer desperate for approval. You're not looking for shortcuts. You're not intimidated by someone else's spotlight because you know your roots are still expanding. And when the time is right, you won't have to fight to be seen. You won't have to beg to be chosen. You'll be ready. Even spiritually, the pattern is consistent. Think about it. So many of the people God used powerfully had seasons of hiddenness. Moses in the desert, David in the field, Jesus himself in obscurity for 30 years before stepping into public ministry. And what was happening in those hidden years? Foundation, preparation, depth. They were becoming someone who could carry the weight of the call. So if you feel unseen right now, if you're doing the work and no one seems to notice, don't despise this season. This is your rooting season. This is where your strength is being built, where your integrity is being tested, where your endurance is being developed. You are not behind, you are becoming. And when the light finally finds you, you won't crumble under the pressure. You'll be grounded. You'll be ready because you didn't just show up, you grew up. Let the shadows shape you so the spotlight doesn't destroy you. We've been conditioned to chase success like it's something we have to prove. Curate it, package it, post it. Like if no one sees it, it doesn't count. But real success, real, grounded, lasting success doesn't need to be broadcast to be valid. In fact, the loudest people in the room often haven't done the deepest work. Because when your success is real, when it's built from the inside out, it doesn't need a stage. It doesn't beg to be seen. It simply shows up because who you are speaks louder than what you say. That's why we have to be careful not to confuse exposure with elevation. Just because something is visible doesn't mean it's valuable. Just because it's loud doesn't mean it's solid. And just because people are clapping doesn't mean it's time to celebrate. Some of the most dangerous detours happen when we confuse visibility with arrival. When we start performing for applause instead of pursuing alignment. Success is not something you audition for. It's something you embody. It's not just about the house or the brand or the platform. It's about who you had to become to sustain the things you prayed for. And if the becoming is shallow, the blessings won't hold. That's why building yourself quietly matters, because it forces you to confront the why before you ever reach the what. And if your why is applause, you'll burn out trying to keep an image alive that your soul can't support. Psychologically, we're all vulnerable to the need for recognition. That's human. That's natural. But maturity says, I don't need to be seen to be secure. I don't need to go viral to be valuable. And I don't need validation to know that I'm walking in purpose. Because true success, success that doesn't crumble when the spotlight fades, is a byproduct. It's not the goal. It's the overflow of integrity, the result of discipline, the outcome of private decisions that nobody but God and your inner circle will ever see. And I want you to understand something. There's nothing wrong with being successful. There's nothing wrong with the overflow. But when your